Hey guys, and welcome back to Rage Gaming. Today we're talking about Last Epoch from the perspective of a Diablo 4 player. That's the first ARPG I really got into, while only really dabbling in others until now. And with how Diablo 4 has gone, I found myself craving better showings of the genre, checking out other games like, PoE, but of course with Last Epoch finally releasing into 1.0, I and many other people jumped into the game for the first time. Now it's been a few weeks, so what are we thinking? To cut to the chase, I think Last Epoch is a great ARPG that offers so much of what Diablo 4 is lacking, but also not too intense on the details and the requirements compared to PoE and, the builds in that game. It has a proper endgame with a variety of options for progression, unique systems to the game, incredible itemization and crafting tied to that, and more. But obviously it's not perfect. It's built by a small team that built this up over years, and they're competing against a AAA mammoth that is Diablo. So there are actually some things that I think are better in Diablo, though not a lot. So today let's talk about some of the best aspects of Last Epoch, and also where I find it lacking in comparison with Diablo 4. Right off the bat though, it's the endgame. A big topic and one I could go into serious detail over, so I'm trying to be concise. And the fact is, Diablo 4 did not launch with one. The game simply ended when you reached a complete build, and their way around that, I guess, was to have ridiculous XP requirements, so most people didn't even reach level 100. At the end, you would have just had Uber Lilith kills and maybe tier 100 clears. Now, eventually, we did have some new bosses added, ways to target farm gear instead of true RNG. We had the mess of the abattoir as another endgame system, and now we have the gauntlet, which is genuinely good. It's a clever showing of different mechanics that were already in Diablo, used to create a new game mode with some good interest. There's a deadline, set objectives, a set map, and various sections of higher or lower value, making use of shrines to create new mechanics like intentionally respawning the enemies. It's all good, and it's going to change regularly to set a new challenge to overcome. So that's basically become the goal of our endgame, right? Pushing the gauntlet score as high as you can by using the best build and playstyle you can create. Unfortunately, with the heavy imbalance of the classes and the way things like Uber Uniques aggressively influence player power, you're encouraged to, play the strongest class rather than what you may want to, and also farm drill kills so you have the Ubers required to get a competitive score. So if you're going to do that, you have to do incredibly boring content for an extended unknown period of time. Good luck with that. That's not good, that's really bad. So Last Epoch's main endgame system has been a breath of fresh air in comparison, and the main one is obviously monoliths, which serve up tons of variety of what you're doing as you clear them out. The setting, the enemies, the threats in terms of say resistances, the objectives within each current echo, it changes in some minor and also major ways. You'll get a boss thrown at you during the echo clear, and when you face the final challenge of the current monolith, you get an even bigger one. And even then, progressing through echo to echo, you get to decide what path you're going to take, what challenges you're going to choose to take on or ignore, and what the rewards are that you're actually going to target. And eventually, how far will you push the corruption? Corruption compared to Diablo's Nightmare Dungeon difficulty tiers is a valid comparison. You're pushing the challenge as the number goes up. But where Nightmare Dungeons simply end at tier 100, corruption is technically endless. Meaning when you find yourself clearing a tier 100 fine in Diablo 4, that's it. While with Last Epoch's corruption being endless, you can push it as far as your build can physically handle it. So how good is your build truly? You can test it by seeing how far you can go with the corruption. And also there's this kind of infinite scaling of the item rarities for your drops, so the reward is actually there continually. However, on your way to that concept, to actually push corruption, things do get a bit twisted for who does what better. There's simply so much less grind required to reach peak power levels in Diablo 4. Epoch requires extreme farm to get specific drops, newly improved by the 1.0 update actually, where they put in factions, which will help you target farm stuff or even purchase specific items, which is great. But then the progressing of the faction system is also a massive grind itself originally, which is a big point of feedback. So that's the crux of it. For long-term grinders, it's great that the more time you spend, the more value you get. The raw grind from story end to say plus 200 corruption is a bit overly long for an incomplete build. Therefore, Diablo as designed is much more appealing to a casual player who wants to engage with everything the game has to offer, in their time frame. However, what's going to be waiting for you at the point you get there? Well, it's really not much in Diablo 4 compared to Last Epoch's variety of your monoliths and the infinite potential if you want to go that far. And that's only monoliths. There's still, say, the arena if you want a gauntlet style option, and there's the dungeons which scale in difficulty. But let's really go in on Diablo for a second here. Last Epoch's itemization design, the way you get items, the way you change them through crafting, and for God's sake, a loot filter, it's so much better. The bare minimum for an ARPG to be functional long term, to make it in fact not a massive chore to interact with the item drop system, and understanding what's worth your attention to look at as an item, you know, so when a drop happens, it's relevant and exciting for you, is another massive topic I need to really stay focused on. Last Epoch's itemization is wonderful. You've got items with their implicits, the stats at the top, which massively raise in power as you get higher in level yourself. There's tons of types within each armor piece, so chest pieces might offer different things based on the base that it is, from armor, health to DPS increasing options, and then that's compared to the affixes, which are split into two types. There's prefixes and suffixes. Basically, one type is like offensive and utility picks, the other can be defensive and utility, and there's also things like experimental affix types, or you can seal affixes. All of that is to say that each affix actually matters, and it's a lot more interesting. The majority of the affixes are going to be powerful and relevant to someone if your build is going to benefit from it. There's a lot less filler and padding affixes, unlike you would see in Diablo 4. So yeah, I think LE's itemization is interesting and really thought out, where D4 cannot say the same. So we're praying for something special with Season 4, where they're going to be making a massive change about that. But what we're not expecting to see, which I still think is a bare minimum in Season 4, is a loot filter, and a much bigger stash as well. A loot filter allows you to choose what drops are highlighted for you, or just ignored, not shown to you. It means anything you do see drop with a relevant filter on is going to be important to you, and you should check it. Further, you can set special highlights to, highlight an item that's going to be really good, and it prevents you from having to pick up every item, manually scanning every detail, and then weighing up in your head if that's relevant to you or not, which will probably be 99.9% of the items that drop will not matter to you. And you have to do that in Diablo 4, which is just mind-boggling. There is some hope though, like I say, in Season 4 with the itemization update. They're planning to actually use the codex system as a means to sort all the aspects you've stored and organize it into a higher quality of life way, instead of having to dump tons of items into your stash, which is comically too small and always has been. So now you'll be able to store the aspects into that kind of infinite storage of the codex. That's going to be incredible compared to what it is now, and it is a bit comparable to the affix shard system we have in Last Epoch, except in theory maybe even kinder. Last Epoch uses crafting as a major part of your progress. Find an item with an affix on it, and you can break that down to get some of the shards, or all of it with a lucky removal. These can then be spent to level the strength of the affix on a piece of gear with a better setup you want to use. Instead of taking an item to a blacksmith and adding +1 to it as a whole, you're specifically upgrading parts of the item, which means you can also remove specific parts not relevant or good to you and add one that is, or RNG swap them around and other mechanics. It's brilliant and it's very kind. You just have to have the resources relevant. This is compared to Diablo's depressing enchanting system, which forces you to change only one affix on an item maximum, and that one thing you can change, enjoy the true RNG that is re-rolling it, and it gets expensive really quick. So I love the idea that in Last Epoch, I just need to gather the materials through my gameplay by breaking down items, collecting them, finding the affixes, and I've earned the progression to put the thing I want on an item and progress that. So it's possible we'll see an improved enchanting system in Diablo 4 at some point, but God, I hope they learn from Epoch on that. Okay, so for the final point, it's going to swing both ways pretty heavily. Last Epoch is so much more alt-friendly, and I love it. Between the loot filter allowing you to, filter for items you planned your alt will want while you're playing your main character or whatever, that's awesome. Or there's the fact that you have way more stash space than you're ever going to remotely need, so you're not restricted on gathering items for an alt and prepping them and storing them somewhere in a tab. And you've got the crafting system, meaning you can create the absolute peak of an item for your planned alt, even at different stages of its progress, to allow for insane blasting pretty much immediately, and that's very satisfying. You can also skip massive chunks of the campaign using dungeons and the keys you've collected, and while it's true in D4 you can also skip the campaign, you also can't, because in the seasonal content model you have to do that story and unlock the new seasonal powers and progress them. That's enforced every season, at least so far. Also, Epoch lets you pick the faction early on follow-up characters, and also maintains the rep, which is going to be insane if you're, say, Merchant's Guild and buying specific items. So Epoch is wonderful to alts, as an ARPG should be. It should be a majorly important aspect of the game to encourage and create lots of quality life around, and Last Epoch just nails that. However, it definitely doesn't do a good job of letting you change builds. It has a really awkward system, and while Diablo 4 is not great at it, I do think it's actually better. I really dislike the skill leveling system in Last Epoch in terms of how punishing it is, and it feels very unnecessary. What I'm talking about is the skill trees for each skill, which in a concept is awesome. You level it, get points, spend them, all good. But when you're you're like, hey, I've been using this build, these skills, I'm going to try something different. Now you have to level them again. Now there is a system in place to help with that where you reach minimum levels as you progress. So when you swap, that's where it starts. But that minimum level is tied to your overall progress, meaning when you're most likely to swap skills around a lot at lower levels, when you want to test stuff, you're punished the most. It's a massive nerf to you if you're, say, just getting a skill to level 4 and got some big power spike to change that at that point. So what I'd like to see in Epoch around that will be minimum levels being way kinder, much earlier. And when I raise a skill to, say, level 20 once, that's the new minimum for that specific skill. So let's say I'm using Javelin, it's level 20. I swap it off to something else. I swap back to Javelin. It's back to level 20 because obviously I've already earned that. Diablo, by comparison, allows for this no problem. You've got the seasonal power in your character and that's just it. You've got levels for your skill tree and your Paragon. They're going nowhere, whatever swapping you're doing. And also, gear overlap is a lot kinder in D4. I found that in Last Epoch, the items for builds are often hyper-specific. One Paladin build to another is unlikely to use the same items. So it's just something I found myself appreciating about Diablo. But I think those are just some of the most standout things I've been thinking about. These comparisons between the two, and some of the best things I want Diablo 4 to learn from. It's exciting that D4 has relevant plans. For a lot of what we talked about today, I just hope that they can look at Epoch and learn from it specifically. Diablo 4 is an extremely polished game. At a foundational level, the base gameplay is smoother and satisfying because of that. It's that AAA development. Compared to that though, Last Epoch feels like the better game for a player invested in the ARPG genre, rather than a casual player who wants everything fast and then to move on. So in closing, Last Epoch feels like it's got a good foundation and what's been built on that is fantastic. Diablo 4 though has the strongest foundation in the genre right now, at least prior to PoE 2's release. But the issue here is an unfinished mess was built upon it and it's barely held together with tape. The live service team were basically left to the wolves to resolve the major issues and add entire features that are missing that should have been there at launch. So that's my current thoughts anyway. I'll be interested to see what you guys think in regards to the comparison now we've had 1.0 Epoch for a bit. But for now, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.